I have with me today Ambassador Jayant Prasad. He was India's ambassador to Afghanistan and Nepal, among other places. And he was also India's Director General, former Director General of the IDSA. Welcome to ThePrint, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for talking to us. So we will first discuss, of course, Afghanistan now that India has again started to look at Afghanistan in a sense. In less than a year, we have now opened our embassy in Kabul, although what we've been told by the Ministry of External Affairs that this is a technical team that will look at distribution of the humanitarian assistance there. But how important do you think it is to look to have your presence there in Afghanistan? Because there's a lot of criticism also happening. Why is India engaging with the Taliban? What would you like to say on that?
You know, Nayanima, there are three stark choices that we have. One is that of engagement. One is that of isolating ourselves and turning our backs on Afghanistan. And one is opposing the government in question, the Taliban regime. What we have done, the technical team for humanitarian assistance, is really a kind of liaison office. So it's not an embassy. It will be wrong to call it an embassy.
Okay.
Although we can progress in that direction easily if Taliban were to show some progress on some of the commitments that they have made. For example, the UN Commissioner for Special Rapporteur for Afghanistan has said that human rights violations over there are gross, flagrant and systematic.
Okay.
And then there are reports coming out on the social media, which I'm sure you would have seen, of Sare Jungle in Ghor and of Balkhab in Sarepul.
Yes.
And there has been tremendous oppression of the Hazara people who are also Shia.
Right.
So they are a double minority. They are, if you compare it with India, the Hazaras are, let's say, the lower castes in Afghanistan, or considered to be so. And they also profess a slightly different version of Islam than the majority of Afghans. But despite all that, I think our presence in Kabul of a small compact team for coordinating our assistance, which is basically right now humanitarian, is important.
Sir, if I can also ask you in the sense, as you rightly said, that the Taliban has not made the commitments it had talked about. Of course, the kind of, the ethnic divisions there exist with what you said, the persecution of Hazaras, and also on women education, we are seeing what is happening constantly. Although they claim that some women are working, some are in the universities, but the secondary schools and all for the girls, it's all shut and nobody knows when it will be reopened. But and we also saw the latest scholars conference that they had, the Islamic scholars, where it was clearly stated there was no women there, and it was clearly stated that, indirectly, that women don't need that kind of representation. So isn't there a dichotomy? They know if they do this and they say this, there will be no international recognition for them. How do you think, what could be their plan going forward if this continues?
The Taliban leadership has a dilemma because the Taliban is an ideological movement. It is an Islamist movement.
Right.
So they have certain very core beliefs, set of beliefs. And they are conservative, they are misogynist. For them to change, although there are younger elements within the Taliban leadership who want change, who want international recognition.
Okay.
But it is my personal judgment that it's going to be very, very difficult for the leadership to change, because if they change, there are others waiting to take their place ideologically, like the Islamic State of the Khorasan. And even within the Taliban, And so they are avoiding any splits in the party by maintaining the hard line. For example, the hard line on women is quite amazing. It's not just that school children beyond grade 6, girls cannot go to school anymore. Some teachers are working, nurses are working, some doctors are working, but women are largely out of the workforce. But the even more serious thing besides education is that there has been a complete obliteration of women from public life. And then the third has been this remarkable decree which was brought out that a woman cannot walk around unaccompanied by male relatives, and the woman must cover herself up to her eyes, so only the eyes are visible. So these are very tough edicts, and if these were to be followed, then the Afghanistan that we know will be difficult to retrieve.
So, the question that arises right now is, it seems that more or less countries around the world, they have no option but to deal with them, especially looking at the plight of the Afghan people there. But at the same time, there is this hope somewhere probably, and also when I speak to some of the former Afghan officials, we still have the ambassador here. It seems that there is some hope left for the Republic. Do you think there is any hope, especially now that all those reports are coming out of huge corruption taking place under the Ashraf Ghani government? He apologized. The NSA, Hamdullah Mohib, he also apologized. But what hope is there in terms of them returning?
I don't think they'll be allowed to return, or they are willing to return.
Okay.
That's my judgment.
Sure.
But surely, as a result of engagement, there could be some improvements, because look, the Taliban have said that they would welcome back in the Afghan army the officers who were undergoing training in India. You know, India was one of the prime countries, the most important, who took Afghan officers under training and sent them back to Afghanistan. So I think that's a big step for this government to take in Kabul. They also, the good thing about our engagement is that some of the things that we have not been able to do in the last 10 months, we would have to start doing them. For example, getting back Afghan students into India, getting back Afghan medical visa seekers who for 10 months are waiting for the 3rd, 4th or 5th round of their chemotherapy because they have already undergone some treatment in India. So, by force, we'll have to do all that because the Afghan government has, the Taliban regime has rather, just said that they would like India to start taking back Afghan students. Why? Because they want to build an Afghan state. And this is a positive sign, not a negative sign. Because, you know, what is Pakistan's objective in Afghanistan? There are many objectives, but the foremost objective that I can make out is to have India present there not present there at all costs. And if that is not possible, to reduce India's footprint as much as possible. Then there are some secondary objectives like settling the Durand line, which they even tried when Mullah Omar was around between 96 and 2001, but they didn't succeed with him. Then they want the Taliban regime to take action against Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. And then they want perhaps, or the deep state in Pakistan, or the establishment in Pakistan, however you describe them, they want probably to use Afghan territory to train terrorists, to create pressure points in the neighborhood, especially against India. So, Pakistan would be a great anathema for Pakistan to have any Indian presence in Afghanistan.
True, true.
And to that extent, we'll also have to be careful because we'll have to tread softly so as to not raise hackles all around. Especially those who don't want the old friendship between the Indian and Afghan people to be revived. And it's a good thing in a way that the focus of our attention has shifted from the government of Afghanistan to the people of Afghanistan.
Right.
If you look at the statements that have come from the MEA or the spokesperson or the briefing done after the Joint Secretary's JP Singh's visit to Kabul,
Yes.
this element comes out very strongly and that has to be welcomed.
So that's interesting. You said this point, and I'll come to Pakistan also a little later. But when we realize that we are and we have to engage with Afghanistan, keeping Afghan people the priority, why is it that we are still sort of hesitant in giving visas to the students? As you also spoke about, the students are constantly raising their voices on several platforms. Some are also, they have their scholarship with ICCR, their whole academic year is sort of now gone. Then there are, of course, very serious medical cases that are there. But then we see that, you know, the flights that are operating now, we mostly see Sikhs and Hindus coming back. But what about the Afghan people?
I think slowly that will happen in normal course. It's been unfortunate what happened in the past, and let's not speculate on the reasons for it because various people give various reasons for it.
Right.
But and some even say that we do it to placate the Taliban regime, which is absolutely not true.
Okay.
So the fact is that Government of India is taking steps now in the right direction. So they have just allowed through the Civil Aviation Ministry permission to Afghan carriers to start their flights to India. Now, how can they operate these flights if there are no passengers? So adding 2+2 means that India is probably going to consider resuming grant of visas to Afghan nationals, not just to Hindus and Sikhs who have Afghan nationality.
So now coming to Pakistan, do you think it is Pakistan is the main reason why we see several countries, including the US, indirectly dealing with the Taliban? A, and also B, there was a time when India had a massive presence there, and you were there in Afghanistan. We had our consulate in Mazar-e-Sharif, Herat, Jalalabad, and of course Kabul. So that also had gave us a strong presence there, and we could have our ears and eyes opened there. But now that we are not there and we are slowly going, the role that Pakistan is playing there, and we also seeing what is happening in Pakistan in terms of the political instability there, how much do you think they can use Afghan territory for terrorism?
They can, because they have proxies within the Taliban. But slowly, as the Taliban regime gets established, there is going to be a difference between Kabul and Islamabad or Kabul and Rawalpindi, where the real decisions are taken about Afghanistan. Pakistan would like the Afghan state to continue to be a kind of controlled chaos.
In a state of turmoil, yeah.
Or not a strong state. But the Taliban leadership will have different objectives. If we take you back 20 years, one of the last things that Mullah Omar had done before the Taliban regime was ousted in November 2001 was to write a letter to Musharraf, the president in Pakistan, that Pakistan needed to have more application of the Sharia and a kind of Islamist state. And Mullah Zaif, who was a collaborator of Mullah Omar's and was one of the co-founders of the Taliban, he has written a book called My Life with the Taliban.
Okay.
And it's an autobiography which got republished also in India. And it's quite instructive because the chapter on Afghan-Pakistan relationship shows that they had very testy relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And he didn't have good words to describe Pakistani actions.
Right. Sir, but then what about the relationship between Afghan Taliban and the TTP? How do you see that?
You know, the TTP, like many other groups, even ETIM, the East Turkestan Islamic movement, which operates, or China fears it might operate in Xinjiang. All these groups helped the Taliban in the fight against the Americans and the coalition forces. So to expect that they would turn against them was too much. Pakistan expected that the Taliban would expel the TTP back to Pakistan, but that didn't happen.
Right.
All that the Taliban did was to do exactly what Pakistan had done. Pakistan harbored the Taliban, gave them support, sustenance, and sanctuary. Similarly, the Taliban gives support and sanctuary to the TTP and continue to do so.
Correct.
And like the Pakistanis, they offered that the TTP would be willing to be brought to the negotiating table to talk to the Pakistanis. So Pakistan did that with the United States. So the US and the Taliban had the Doha Agreement in February 2020. Similarly, now the TTP is talking to the government of Pakistan. In Kabul, facilitated through the Taliban. So it's going to be a difficult relationship. And TTP attacks within Pakistan have been much more in the last 10 months compared to the previous year.
And sir, what about the Shura councils? How do you think they are now operating?
Let's hand it to Pakistan that they had one success after the Taliban victory in Kabul. After the Taliban entered Kabul, there was quite a lot of faction fight there.
Okay.
Then the Taliban accepted the visit of the ISI chief at that time. And he went there at the height of the resistance in Panjshir.
Right.
But what happened in Panjshir was less important than what he was able to do within the Taliban. He settled their quarrels and got them to form an interim government. And I think that should not be underestimated.
Okay.
So Pakistan has a certain clout with the Taliban government, which is not to say that the Taliban government in Pakistan will see eye to eye on issues that concern Afghanistan or even regional issues, because Pakistan would be dead against India having any kind of liaison office or a contact team, or India providing humanitarian assistance. I'll give you another example.
Sure.
How much Pakistan is under pressure. In the previous regime, we supplied high protein biscuits to reduce the quantity of the wheat we had to send Afghanistan. So you reduce the wheat by a factor of 9 to 1 if you convert the wheat into high protein biscuits. So we asked Pakistan for permission to take the biscuits
via
across.
The trucks,
So with great difficulty, they finally agreed to some consignments going through. But they laid down two conditions. That the truck should belong to the NLC, the National Logistics Corporation, which is run by the Pakistan Army. And second condition was that the boxes in which the biscuits were packed, they should not carry the insignia of India or the Indian flag or say India-Afghan
okay.
friendship or anything. We readily agreed because the biscuit packets themselves carried all those emblems.
Oh, okay, that's
But
unknown.
now, when we are sending 50,000 tons of wheat to Afghanistan, they are going in trucks with very well marked on the front of the truck that this is part of the Indian program for the Afghan people. And the sacks are also marked with the colors of the flag. And so it is all being done in the open. And it is being done in the open because the Taliban government or the Taliban regime insisted with the Pakistanis that if they were really well-wishers of the Afghan people, they have to allow Indian medicines and wheat to come through Pakistan.
That's interesting, and thank you so much, sir, for giving us that information, which was not really that known publicly. So now shifting focus a bit, and not much, but we now have Nepal also. There are these discussions going on that what is happening in Sri Lanka can also happen in Nepal in terms of the economy sinking and all, and the political instability there, which just refuses to sort of settle down. And that again becomes very vulnerable and a concern point for India, with the fact that there is a terror network that works, across Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Nepal. So my question on Nepal to you firstly will be, sir, do you think it is going the Sri Lanka way?
Not entirely. I'll tell you why. Because the Nepalese leadership, including surprisingly the communist leadership,
Right.
or the erstwhile government, the former government, they refuse to take Chinese loans at a high rate of interest.
Right.
And they gave some projects on a nomination basis to Chinese firms. But they constantly kept raising this point.
Okay.
That from the World Bank, from the Asian Development Bank, from India, they got assistance of a different type. They got a lot of grant assistance. Most of our assistance is in the form of grants. And even the Exim Bank assistance is a few basis points higher than maybe the ADB, but with a very long 30-year repayment plus possibilities of further postponement, plus with a very low interest rate, so that the grant component, even within commercial credit from India, from the Exim Bank, works out to more than a quarter of the loan given, which is not the case with the Chinese. So the Nepalese have not been as indiscriminate as the Sri Lankans have been, or the Pakistanis have been in the in taking obligations from the Chinese.
Sir, how do you see the political turmoil there? There was split within the Communist Party. Then we get to see all these people from the older generation who now really want to become the PM, have certain say. And then there is this feeling that you always get when you speak to Nepal, is the fact that there is this sentiment that they want to sort of get freedom from India's interference, if I can use that word, which is why they keep asking about the review of the 1950 treaty. What do you have to say on that, sir? You've been there and you've seen it.
It's quite simple on the treaty. After all, we had a treaty also with some other neighbors, which we revised quite happily. So it's not this government, but the government under Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the government under Dr. Manmohan Singh. Repeatedly, we have told the Nepalese that if they want to revise the treaty, the foreign secretaries are mandated and they should come forward with proposals and revise it. If they want to abrogate the treaty, India would be happy to do so.
Right.
If they want to revise the treaty or modify the treaty or upgrade the treaty, which would be the sensible thing to do, to orient it more to the 21st century and to broad base our cooperation. We have a development partnership,
Correct.
but it is still quite narrow. So we can include areas like, for example, environment, like agriculture in them. Right now we concentrate on infrastructure and on power projects, connectivity, grid lines. So that can be done quite easily. So I don't see a problem there. It is like a bugbear. It is like something which is ferreted out by people who don't want to India and Nepal to have good relations. And so we have to give the Nepalese slightly long rope,
Right.
and let them come up with ideas and respond to them creatively.
But what about the instability there, sir, and the fact that we saw what happened under PM Oli, them changing the map and redrawing the boundaries. Where do you think all this will lead to as far as the bilateral relationship is concerned?
That was quite unfortunate what happened, because the India-Nepal boundary has been demarcated 98%, and the strip maps are ready, and they just have to be signed by
yes.
the plenipotentiaries. But what has happened is that a small dispute, we have two disputes, one in Susta, one in Kalapani. The Nepalese escalated the dispute and from a very small dispute made it a large dispute. They amended their constitution, they changed their flag, they changed their maps, and then now they have created a situation for succeeding governments in Nepal and India, making it difficult for them to resolve this issue. So it is a difficult issue now to resolve. And what was done was quite wrong, because not only were all these anti-India moves undertaken by the government, but they poisoned a whole generation of Nepalese. School children in government schools were asked to take out marches against India. So you had 12-year-old, 13-year-olds marching on the streets with anti-India placards. So in a sense, the minds of a whole generation of young Nepalese have been subverted. So we'll have to be patient. We'll have to do the right things by the Nepalese people, and we'll have to slowly reconstruct our relationship.
So, but then you do have a larger concern of Chinese footprints there, right, which has increased in a major way. And that also is a concern in the larger neighborhood. How do you think we can sort of counter that? I know there is this concept of completing projects earlier, but in terms of strategy, how do you think that can work out?
I don't think it's an insurmountable problem, because we have certain assets of closer proximity, geography, culture, with each of our neighbors. If you look at the contiguous areas, people on both sides of the border speak the same language, have the same culture. So what we have to do is to basically lift our game. We have to invest more. We have to believe that India cannot alone make progress. We have to make progress together with our neighbors. Because unless we do that, our standing in the world will not be what we want it to be. So if we do all that, these problems will be taken care of. Because to give you an example of a country I know well, which is Nepal. India has offered Nepal. It's a landlocked country. It has a problem of access. We have given them the port of Calcutta and Visakhapatnam for their third country trade. 2 points are given. there are 18 crossing points between Nepal and India. The Chinese have given 6 export points from their ports in the last few years. But 99% of China's trade with third countries goes through India. And the moment the Nepalese develop some trade with the Gulf and West Africa, I'm sure we'll give permission for Kandla and so on. So not only that, Prime Minister Modi has reiterated very strongly that he is prepared to give the Nepalese access to the Bay of Bengal through the riverine route, so that Nepalese barges can go into the Bay of Bengal. So Nepal would no longer be a landlocked country, but for that Nepal also requires to do some things. Nepal will have to build reservoirs and dams so that there is 24/7 availability of navigable waters between the Nepalese rivers and the Indian rivers. And all the Nepalese rivers flow into Indian rivers. So it's not difficult to accomplish. So these are some of the things that can be done in the long run. And we are committed also to taking our railway to Kathmandu.
Yes.
We are connecting Nepal at various border points. So if all this goes forward, I don't think we need to worry about the Chinese bugbear in Nepal, or for that matter in any other South Asian country. But we'll have to work consistently at what we are planning to do or what we have announced we would do. And there would be many obstacles because in Nepal there are lobbies, including political lobbies, which would be opposed to what India wants to do for Nepal. So the trick is to proceed forward in a way that we are able to do the things that will integrate the region more with India, with the Indian economy and with India as a country.
How key it is for you, you think personally, for us to have some sort of dialogue with Pakistan, because then SAARC is sort of stalled. I don't see BIMSTEC moving much because that was seen as a counter to bypass Pakistan. I mean, a plan to bypass Pakistan. Do you think at some point we need to have some dialogue with them?
Certainly, but it goes back to the old issues. We have had issues since the Mumbai attack. And the Indian point of view is very simple, that we cannot have dialogue at the point of a gun. So there has to be some basis for the dialogue. That is the problem with Pakistan. And you know, with Pakistan we can resolve even difficult issues like Kashmir. But the resolution will come as a factor of improved India-Pakistan relations, not by putting Kashmir first. If India-Pakistan relations improve, then a lot of bilateral issues can be resolved. So that is our perspective. And in any case, if we resume a dialogue, it will have to be a step-by-step approach. We cannot resolve everything all at once. If we haven't resolved them in the last 70 years, how do you expect to resolve them in a jiffy?
Right, very true.
Yeah.
So I think we need to have that kind of a comprehensive policy. But since you said this, my last question to you will be, how important or relevant do you think SAARC is, or do you think we need to find out some other innovative way to move this neighborhood ahead? I mean, as far as South Asia is concerned.
I would say this, that SAARC is very important. Because if we have a vehicle, why not try to use it? But the paradoxical thing is, it's a fact that since the time SAARC has been dysfunctional, since the time SAARC has had no summit meetings, our connectivity projects with Bangladesh, with Nepal, and now going forward even with Sri Lanka are proceeding much better than when SAARC was very active.
Okay.
So, to a certain degree, we can work around SAARC being paralyzed, but it will be better if SAARC were to begin functioning, because SAARC provides a kind of plurilateral platform where all countries can be together, and some increased interaction on a group level between and among SAARC countries would be useful.
That's good, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for
You're
giving
very
us all
welcome.
those insights. Very helpful for us and also for our viewers. That was Ambassador Jayant Prasad talking to ThePrint. This is Nayanima Basu. With me on camera is Pooja Kher.